King Charles entered the private meeting expecting to approve a carefully prepared royal plan. Instead, two solicitors placed a sealed file before him and delivered a sentence that changed everything. Diana had left complete control of her private legacy to William. Within minutes, the king cancelled the transfer he had been preparing, dismissed the waiting officials, and remained alone with the document that had just defeated the crown's authority. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had summoned senior officials to approve a memorial trust placing Diana's private correspondence, selected jewelry, recordings, and unfinished charitable plans under crown control. A memorial trust was a legal structure created to manage assets for a stated purpose. To the monarch, it promised order. To the palace, it promised control over a legacy that still shaped public feeling. The solicitors shattered that confidence. Their documented legal review confirmed that Diana's protected possessions, archive rights, residual estate interests, and intellectual legacy belonged under William's authority. The prince had not merely inherited objects, he had received the power to decide how her private history could be handled, meaning every exhibition, publication, or transfer now required his written consent. Charles read the decisive clause twice. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the file, and said nothing. The king had faced political storms and family fracture, yet this silence carried a different pain. Diana had built a barrier he could not cross, and she had trusted their son to hold it. Camilla waited in the adjoining room, expecting the announcement to proceed. When an aide quietly explained that the meeting had been abandoned, the queen consort did not answer. She understood that Diana's name had again redirected Charles's reign, reopening a wound neither could publicly escape. The lead solicitor then revealed a second sealed instruction through the signed annex attached to Diana's estate file. No part of the archive could be reorganized, displayed, transferred, or commercially used without William's approval. Royal preference could not override it. Household protocol could not weaken it. Even a memorial charter, the formal document establishing the trust, could not erase her command. Charles reached toward the unsigned papers, stopped, and pulled his hand back. He ordered every prepared copy removed. Then the monarch asked the only question that still mattered. Did William already know? The solicitors hesitated. Their recorded briefing showed that the future king had been informed several days earlier. The king had cancelled the plan, but the deeper wound came from knowing that William had carried Diana's final decision in silence, and had chosen not to warn him. This was never simply a dispute over property. It was a confrontation between a father still burdened by the woman he could not protect, a son determined to defend the mother he lost, and a queen forced to live beneath the shadow of a legacy she could never command. Behind the legal language stood three people carrying different versions of the same history, and none of them was prepared to surrender. William sat alone at Adelaide Cottage, with Diana's signed instruction before him. Adelaide Cottage was the prince's Windsor home, removed from palace ceremony and pressure. He traced his mother's signature with his thumb, feeling grief sharpen into responsibility. To him, the archive was not a collection. It was the last private territory she still possessed. Charles saw something different. The king believed the memorial trust could give permanence to a painful chapter unsettled for decades. A memorial trust was a legal body created to preserve assets for a defined purpose. He wanted order where there had been scandal, dignity where there had been suffering, and one public account strong enough to outlive the bitterness surrounding Diana's death. Camilla listened as he explained the cancelled plan privately. She told Charles she would accept whatever the document required, but her voice tightened when he admitted the trust included a permanent exhibition shaped by the monarchy's official interpretation. The queen consort understood the danger. Diana's life would be preserved, yet the palace would control how she was remembered. William's authority went beyond possession. Diana's instruction allowed him to decide which letters remained sealed, which objects could be displayed, and who could enter the restricted archive. A restricted archive was a protected collection available only to approved individuals. That power mattered because one private sentence, stripped of context, could reshape public judgment for generations. Shock lay inside the inventory. Among the papers was a memorandum Diana had written about William's future duties, his relationship with the crown, and the danger of allowing private grief to become institutional property. The prince had not opened it. He feared the words might force him to choose between loyalty to his mother and peace with his father. Charles sent a request for a private meeting. William read it twice, folded the message once, and placed it beside Diana's instruction. Catherine watched his face harden as he said, "I will listen, but I will not give away what she protected." He replied that the original solicitors and complete legal file must be present. William's refusal to meet on the king's terms did not begin that morning. It began with a single private incident months earlier that had convinced him the palace intended to take control. Months before the solicitors entered the king's meeting, William witnessed a moment that changed his understanding of the palace's intentions. It happened after a private anniversary service, when a folder bearing Diana's name appeared where it should never have been. What looked like routine planning exposed something far more serious. Decisions were already being drafted about her possessions, her letters, and her story, without her son's knowledge or consent. William had once supported a limited national tribute. He believed it would honor Diana's humanitarian work without reopening the wounds surrounding her marriage. A national commemoration was an official program created to preserve a public legacy through ceremonies, charities, and approved historical material. That mattered because one palace-approved version could shape how future generations understood both her suffering and the monarchy's response to it. The danger surfaced after a closed memorial service at St. George's Chapel. William returned unexpectedly to a Windsor sitting room and found an open folder titled Diana Legacy Consolidation. Inside lay a proposed inventory of letters, jewelry, recordings, and private papers marked for transfer into a crown-managed trust. The phrase meant a legal structure controlled through the royal household, not by the family member Diana had personally chosen. Charles entered moments later and froze when he saw the folder in his son's hands. William asked why his mother's private effects were being discussed without him. The king insisted the proposal was preliminary, designed to protect her memory from commercial misuse and conflicting public accounts. Yet his explanation only deepened the prince's suspicion, because protection, without consent, sounded dangerously close to possession. William turned another page and found Camilla's household listed among those allowed to review the exhibition language. His anger sharpened. The queen consort had not written the proposal, but her office had been given influence over how Diana's life would be explained. He closed the folder, slid it toward Charles, and said quietly, "You planned the future of her memory before asking the person she trusted with it." That night, William contacted Diana's original legal representatives and requested a documented review of every surviving instruction attached to her estate. A sealed annex, an additional legal instruction kept separate from the main file, soon emerged. It granted him final authority over the entire private legacy. The discovery changed everything. His silence became strategy, and his grief became resolve. William did not confront Charles immediately. He allowed the palace plan to advance, knowing the solicitors could stop it at the exact moment of signature. By the time father and son finally faced one another again, the argument was no longer about a proposal. It was about whether Charles had knowingly crossed a boundary Diana had drawn herself. The meeting took place without ceremony. No cameras, no public secretaries, no comforting distance between the king and the heir. Charles entered carrying the cancelled trust papers, while William arrived with Diana's sealed instruction. For several minutes, neither man sat down. Then the father accused the son of allowing him to walk into public humiliation, and the son answered with the truth Charles had been avoiding. Charles believed one warning could have prevented everything. William had known about the legal annex before the final approval meeting, yet he had allowed officials, advisors, and the monarch himself to prepare for a signature that could never stand. A legal annex was an additional binding instruction attached to the main estate file. To the king, withholding it felt calculated. To the prince, revealing it early would have given the palace time to delay, reinterpret, or challenge Diana's command before independent solicitors could secure it. Charles asked whether his son had wanted to embarrass him. William did not retreat. He said he wanted the palace to feel the helplessness Diana had endured whenever decisions were made around her, rather than with her. That mattered, because the trust would not simply have preserved possessions. It would have allowed the institution to decide which parts of her pain appeared respectable enough to survive. William said the plan would have turned his mother's suffering into royal property. Charles struck the cancelled proposal against the table and insisted he had been trying to create dignity, not ownership. The king's control cracked. He had imagined a national memorial capable of closing an old wound, while the future king saw a polished structure built over a truth the family had never honestly faced. William placed Diana's sealed instruction between them. Charles reached for it, but his son kept one hand resting on the page until the monarch agreed to read the clause aloud. The recorded legal text stated that her private legacy must never pass to those whose institutional interests may conflict with the emotional welfare of my sons. Silence followed. Charles finally understood that the wording was deliberate. Diana had anticipated that the monarchy might absorb her memory into its official history, turning personal grief into something managed, approved, and safe. Camilla entered only after the argument had ended. She looked first at Charles, then at William, and immediately noticed the missing papers. The queen consort understood what had changed inside that closed room. The prince had taken them, and the king had not stopped him. The confrontation ended without reconciliation, yet the true balance of power was about to become even clearer when the solicitors explained exactly what the crown could, and could not, do next. Kings can dissolve households, approve royal appointments, and reshape the machinery surrounding the monarchy. But the power placed in William's hands did not come from the crown. It came from Diana herself, through a private legal structure created precisely to survive royal pressure. As the solicitors explained each restriction, Charles began to understand that canceling the plan was not a temporary retreat. It was the recognition of an authority he could not command. Diana's legacy had been divided with deliberate care. Ordinary estate assets covered property and possessions that could pass through normal inheritance, while protected personal materials remained under stricter control. Her charitable instructions governed unfinished causes, and a residual trust, an arrangement holding whatever remained after other gifts were settled, stood under independent legal custodians rather than palace officials. That mattered because the monarchy could influence ceremony, but it could not rewrite a private legal command. William was not simply a beneficiary, receiving what his mother had left. He had been named principal guardian of her archive, meaning he held the power to approve access, publication, movement, and interpretation. The prince carried responsibility, not just ownership, and every restriction reflected Diana's fear that private grief might one day be shaped into an institutional message. Charles listened as the lead solicitor explained that even the sovereign could not order the release of a protected letter without the guardian's consent. She watched the king's expression change when he understood that his title offered no exception. He then asked whether Harry shared the same control. The answer cut deeper. Harry remained an emotional beneficiary of Diana's legacy and retained rights connected to selected personal gifts. Yet the documented account stated that final administrative authority belonged to William because he would one day carry the institutional burden she feared. Charles lowered his eyes. The distinction placed one son inside the memory and the other at its gate. The solicitors then confirmed that the cancelled memorial trust would have broken 3 restrictions. It transferred protected materials, allowed unauthorized review, and altered the context of private correspondence. Worse followed. Diana had included a safeguard, empowering William to remove any royal household official who tried to bypass him. Charles asked whether any lawful path remained around his son's refusal. The lead solicitor closed the file and answered, "Not without breaking the wishes you have asked the nation to respect." William acted immediately. He suspended access for 2 senior courtiers already cataloging material for the exhibition, and the palace doors began closing one by one. The law had settled the question of control, but inside the palace the consequences began spreading immediately, and the first person forced to confront the new reality was Camilla. The cancellation moved through the palace faster than any public announcement. Meetings disappeared from calendars. Exhibition drafts were collected. Access codes were changed. Staff members who had spent weeks preparing the memorial trust were suddenly told to stop speaking about it. Yet behind the administrative retreat stood a deeply human consequence. Camilla understood that a project intended to stabilize the monarchy had instead restored Diana's power inside its most private rooms. Charles ordered the memorial committee suspended, the draft charter withdrawn, and every copied inventory returned to the solicitors for independent review. A draft charter was the proposed legal document defining how the trust would operate. Its withdrawal mattered because the palace could no longer turn private possessions into an official national story, and every person who had expected influence suddenly lost it. William's representatives assumed immediate supervision of the archive. They sealed rooms that palace staff had expected to enter within days and removed working notes from the cancelled exhibition. The prince acted quickly because even one copied letter could escape its original context, while one approved caption could soften years of pain into something convenient for the institution. Camilla sat alone after her private secretary confirmed that her household had been removed from the review process. She asked whether William had personally ordered it. The answer came quietly, yes. The queen consort removed her name card from the abandoned committee folder, placed it inside a drawer, and closed it, as the corridor outside fell silent. Charles tried to reassure her that the decision was legal, not personal. Camilla looked at him and said that nothing involving Diana had ever been merely legal for their family. The king could not deny it. His cancelled project had promised unity, yet it had left his wife isolated and his son more suspicious than before. A sharper discovery followed. William's team found a prepared exhibition panel describing the breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage. The wording spread responsibility evenly, softened the institution's failures, and presented control as reconciliation. He rejected it at once. Catherine read the panel privately and agreed with William. She said it did not preserve Diana's suffering. It converted that suffering into language the palace could survive. Yet she refused to let anger destroy every possibility of tribute. Catherine proposed another path. Charles and William would speak without officials, lawyers, or Camilla present, and neither man would bring a prepared statement. This time, Diana's memory would not be negotiated through another palace document. The palace machinery had failed to bring peace, leaving only one possibility: a private conversation between a grieving father and a protective son, with no institution left to speak for them. When Charles and William met again, neither brought a document. The king came without an equerry. The prince arrived without advisors. For the first time since the crisis began, there was no legal language between them, and no royal machinery waiting outside to convert pain into policy. There were only two men speaking about Diana, one carrying regret, the other carrying the responsibility she had deliberately left behind. Catherine had arranged the conversation in a small private room at Windsor. She believed no decision could heal the family until father and son explained what they were truly protecting. An equerry was a royal aide who normally accompanied a senior member of the family. Charles had dismissed his, while William had refused legal support. Their isolation mattered because neither man could hide behind rank, procedure, or carefully prepared advice. William entered ready to defend the archive. Charles entered knowing the legal battle had already ended against him. The king placed one hand flat on the empty table and admitted that the memorial trust had been partly driven by fear. He could not bear the thought that history would remember only the damage surrounding Diana, while every attempt at order would be judged as control. Charles said he had wanted to give her story permanence. William answered that order was not the same as truth. The prince told his father that protecting Diana did not require humiliating him, but it did require refusing to erase what she had endured. "I cannot change what happened," the monarch said. His son held his gaze. "No, but we can stop changing what it meant." The room softened, but another truth remained. Charles revealed through his recorded private account of the meeting that advisors had never shown him the sealed annex before he approved the project. They had described the archive as available for institutional consolidation, meaning private material could be gathered under one palace-controlled system. The admission did not excuse the king, yet it showed how royal machinery had pushed both men toward conflict. William then disclosed something his father had not expected. He had no intention of releasing Diana's most damaging private letters. She had given him control, and he would use it with restraint rather than revenge. That choice mattered because mercy protected Charles without surrendering the truth, while secrecy protected Diana from becoming a weapon in another public battle. Charles finally asked whether a memorial could still proceed under William's authority. Silence stretched between them. Then the future king agreed, but only if Diana's charitable voice became its foundation. Their agreement remained private for only a few hours, because outside Windsor, the sudden cancellation had already become a national story, and the public was preparing its own verdict. By sunrise, the cancelled royal plan was no longer a private family matter. Diana's name dominated broadcasts, newspaper stands, and crowds gathering outside palace gates. The legal revelation struck a public nerve because it seemed to reverse the old balance of power. The woman once deprived of control over her royal life had secured control over her memory and had placed that responsibility in the hands of her eldest son. Buckingham Palace issued a brief statement confirming that the memorial trust would not proceed and that every future decision would respect Diana's private instructions. Buckingham Palace was the monarch's central administrative headquarters, where official royal statements were released. The wording mattered because it admitted that personal royal history did not automatically belong to the institution, even when that history shaped the crown itself. William watched the coverage beside Catherine and grew uneasy as broadcasters described him as the son who had defeated his father. The prince rejected that language. He told her this had never been about victory, it had been about protection. Catherine understood why the distinction mattered, because triumph would deepen the family wound, while restraint could preserve Diana without publicly diminishing Charles. Charles faced a different pain. Old photographs of Diana filled every front page, reviving the grief, anger, and affection the country had never fully released. The king quietly told an aide that the nation was mourning her as though no time had passed. He then looked again at the cancelled trust announcement and realized that public memory had never accepted palace control. One newspaper captured the moment with brutal simplicity. Its front page carried a full-page image of Diana walking beside a young William beneath the headline, "Her Final Trust." By mid-morning, people gathered outside Kensington Palace, carrying white roses and handwritten messages thanking him for defending her wishes. A young mother lifted her child above the crowd to place one flower near the gates, while the headline bearing Diana's face remained raised overhead. A national broadcaster intensified the shock by reading the central legal clause aloud during a documented morning bulletin. The presenter called the cancellation the moment Diana's private voice overruled the monarchy from beyond the grave. William disliked the phrase, but he could not ignore its force. The future king authorized a final palace statement. Before releasing it, however, he sent one sentence to Charles for approval. Diana had possessed the right to define her own legacy. His answer would determine whether reconciliation survived beyond that morning. The world had chosen its symbol, but the final meaning of the crisis depended on whether Charles could publicly accept the boundary Diana had placed between her memory and the crown. The crisis ended not with a courtroom battle or another palace confrontation, but with a sentence approved jointly by a father and son. Charles accepted that Diana's legacy belonged first to the people she trusted, not to the institution that had shaped her life. William accepted that protection did not require permanent war with his father, and the monarchy, forced to confront its past, finally chose respect over possession. Charles abandoned the crown-controlled memorial trust and signed an instruction preventing any household from attempting the same transfer. A formal instruction was a binding written order directing how palace officials must act. That mattered because the cancellation would outlive one meeting, one reign, and every advisor who believed Diana's private history could be absorbed into the crown. William retained authority over his mother's archive, correspondence, recordings, possessions, and charitable plans. The prince's guardianship meant he controlled access and use rather than merely receiving ownership. He carried that power carefully, knowing one reckless release could wound his father, exploit Diana, and turn private grief into public punishment. Charles read the final acknowledgement of Diana's autonomy in silence. He asked for no softer wording and offered no defense of the cancelled plan. The king signed the order, turned the page toward William, and left the pen between them. His son signed beneath him, then closed the file without triumph. William understood that Diana's instruction had not been designed to punish Charles. She had created a boundary, so her identity could never again be managed without her son's consent. That distinction saved the moment from becoming revenge. The future king protected her truth, while refusing to use her pain as a weapon. A revised memorial initiative followed, under William's guardianship. Independent historians and charity representatives would focus on Diana's humanitarian work, while palace imagemakers would hold no power over its message. Camilla voluntarily withdrew from all involvement. The Queen Consort's decision removed tension and allowed Charles to support the tribute without asking his wife to stand inside Diana's legacy. The cancelled plan did not destroy father and son, it changed them. Charles accepted that sovereignty did not grant ownership over every royal memory, while William proved that protection could include mercy. Diana's possessions remained secure, her private words stayed guarded, and her charitable mission moved forward on terms she had chosen. And when the final file was sealed, Diana's legacy no longer stood between Charles and William as a battlefield. It stood behind them, as a boundary both men had finally agreed never to cross again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.